You're listening to the Connected Parenting Minute with Will and CarrieAnn Sandfest. This podcast is a conversation about parenting, using connection first, trauma-informed principles. Because when you lead with connection, everyone feels seen, which is the foundation to a more peaceful home. This podcast reminds you that you don't have to be a perfect parent, but we can all get a little better, one connected parenting minute at a time.
Hello, and welcome back to the Connected Parenting Minute. My name is Will Standfest, and with me
is CarrieAnn Standfest.
So good to be back with you again tonight, honey.
Yeah, it's been a little bit since we recorded. I think, was it 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks, so it's good to be back behind the microphone and do it again.
Yeah, we've been a little busy with work.
I've been traveling a lot for work lately.
So with that, I've been, taking care of the house and kids.
Solo with 8 kids. No big deal, right?
It's all good.
Well, it's a good thing I married Superwoman, so the house doesn't burn down while I'm gone.
I don't even know what to say.
You say, I love you too, babe.
That works.
So tonight on the podcast, I wanted to talk about this concept of getting a diagnosis for our children. It's a topic that can be a bit controversial for some people, whereas you have some people that are like, oh my gosh, get me all the diagnoses, get me all the medications and whatever. And you've got people that are like, oh my gosh, how could you possibly do that? That's just terrible and will cause such negative effects on my child for lots of different reasons. We wanted to take a few minutes tonight and kind of talk through our experiences with that, both positive and negative, and hopefully offer some perspectives that you may not have considered and encourage you, because you, our listeners, are good parents, and we want to come alongside you and help you learn from the things we've done right, and probably more specifically the things we've done wrong.
Exactly. We tend not to talk about those quite as much though as we probably should. It's just a thing.
So, getting a diagnosis. What do you say to somebody who's like, diagnosis? How could you do that? You're labeling my child.
So that's funny, because that was definitely the era of life that I grew up in as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I have some really good friends that talk about, maybe that concept that diagnosing their kids with something would be putting a label on them. But I think that it is definitely not necessarily the case. And I think in our experience, we have gotten diagnoses for our kids, and it's been super helpful.
It's been eye-opening, really, because it's not about, in our perspective, getting a diagnosis for our child is not about creating a label or a limitation or saying that they can't do something. It's about understanding how their brain operates differently than, say, a neurotypical child's brain does.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it was very helpful and informative understanding. We've got a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD. We've got a child that's been diagnosed with FASD and, PTSD from trauma and a few other things. And so we've had experiences going through this with doctors, kind of back and forth and all that.
No, it's true. And some of them, I was kind of surprised at how hard we had to kind of almost fight to get those diagnoses.
Yeah.
And not necessarily because doctors weren't willing to give them, but because it was just kind of like, oh, you're just blowing things out of proportion.
Yeah, that's true. We had a whole thing with our 9-year-old when he was younger, when we both knew he was not neurotypical.
Yeah, we knew that something was kind of, from when he was a little one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the only reasons that I feel like we had such knowledge with that was because he was our 5th kid.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, we're like, this isn't our first time around the block.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something going on here that we don't completely understand. And we want to look at that and try to kind of get to the bottom of it.
I remember when he went to public school for his first year of kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were in the preschool meet the teacher night or whatever like that, we kind of pulled the teacher aside and the gal who ended up being his special education teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, hey, look, he's got some stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to need a little extra help, some extra supports in the classroom. Can we make a plan of what's going to be best for him, what's going to help him succeed here?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the response we got?
I do. It was, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens. We're going to have to observe him ourselves.
If we created a special plan for every parent that came in and said that, all these kids would have special plans.
Yeah.
Yeah. maybe they would, because that would be awful. But yeah, and then sure enough, a couple months into the year, they're like, yeah, your son needs some support. It's like, really? Please tell me more about that.
Right. You don't say.
So there's a metaphor I heard, kind of a description that talks about this idea of getting a diagnosis for your child that was super helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember who told it to me first, so credit due to whoever came up with this originally. But when you picture one of our children who has a mental health diagnosis or mental health issue or mental health struggle, that is a legitimate limitation. Like their brain functions chemically differently than a neurotypical brain does. And that causes certain limitations. It has certain benefits too. And that's something we'll talk about here in a little bit. And when you picture some of the things we say to people with mental health struggles of, well, you just need to try harder. Oh, it's just in your mind. All these other things we say, because a lot of us don't understand it legitimately. It's not normally done out of malice. It's done out of a lack of understanding.
Well, and because our kids that struggle with certain things don't even understand it themselves.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And
that's a really good point.
It's not like they're saying, I'm wrestling with this. Like, this is really hard for me, because they don't realize that. They just, you see what you get.
Yeah. And our brain normalizes things.
Exactly.
Right? Because I don't know anything else than what happens in my own brain. So I don't know that the way I think is different than the way you think. Right? And especially for our children that don't have the emotional or intellectual vocabulary to be able to express that.
Exactly.
Right? But getting back to the metaphor, a diagnosis that's a legitimate chemical difference in the brain can be a handicap in certain situations. Right? And we would never say to a child in an actual physical wheelchair, oh, you just need to try harder. This is all in your mind. This is all made up. All these things we say to people with mental health struggles, because you can see it. You can see their physical handicap.
Right.
And in certain situations, that mental health struggle is a handicap. It's like an invisible wheelchair.
Yeah.
We need to legitimize and understand that that's a real thing, that there are legitimate, real issues. For example, for our child who has an FASD diagnosis, there's memory issues that are typically associated with that. And so what that typically looks like is something happened, she did something or somebody else did something, and we ask the famous question that you should never ask your child with FASD, what happened or why?
Why did you do that? And the response typically is, I don't know. Oh, that's not my favorite.
Yeah, it can be super triggering. It can be really frustrating. I don't know what happened. It's hard not to say, yes, you do. You were there.
Exactly.
It was 30 seconds ago.
Exactly.
It's all the things. We get really spun up. Going back to the fact that an FASD diagnosis is a legitimate chemical and physiological difference inside of her brain. We have to understand that memory issues are a part of that. Her brain literally remembers things differently.
And so that I don't know, it's probably pretty legitimate.
There are times when it's a reaction. It's just the first thing that comes out of her mouth. But we also have to give her grace that there are times where she legitimately does not remember because her brain legitimately did not store it. Or this concept called conflagration, where her brain might have stored it half true, half not. Like she can legitimately talk herself into believing that it happened a completely different way than anybody else in that situation remembers. But that's how her brain works.
Right.
And so we have to come up with strategies and things that can help with that to avoid those situations.
Like not asking why so much. And it's amazing when you don't want to say that, how often it comes out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Like a lot. I have to bite my tongue halfway through and be like, you know what? Doesn't matter. Yeah.
So again, the diagnosis is not a label or limitation, but it's a way to understand and a different way to look at. There are legitimate things happening within this child's brain that are different.
Right. So with there being legitimate things that are going on with the child's brain, that brings us to that whole medication debate.
That is a big debate. And that's a hard one too. There are some very legitimate arguments on both sides of the coin here, and we are going to address both sides. Please don't turn us off.
Right.
I really want to talk about this because we've had both ends of the experiences with medication.
Right. So we'll start with our 9-year-old.
Okay.
So he, like we said, was diagnosed pretty early on, I would say almost before school age, with ADHD. And we knew that, and we did a lot of research, and we did a lot of changing how we parented. So those things were very legitimate. Like we put a lot of work into, I always say he's the kid that helped us to grow the most as parents and really started us on this journey of being like, how do we do this better?
Yeah, he was the catalyst, really.
Exactly. Then, gosh, I mean, we've gone years and years since his diagnosis and not really done anything. And then
it's been almost 4 years now.
Yeah. Then we started having a conversation with this doctor, and she brought up, well, like, do you want to try medication? And I was kind of like, I've always, I mean, again, growing up in the era of you don't get a label, you don't label your kids, you don't put them on the medication because everybody, and this was the house that I grew up in. So,
yeah.
But it's something that we started to talk about a little bit. And I said, well, maybe we'll try just a little bit. Because one of the things was he was struggling with reading, like really, I mean, we homeschool and it was like pulling teeth to get him to sit and focus to try. And it was just like banging my head against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried a few things really, really low dose. And, for him, they didn't work. They didn't do anything, but they also like gave him like stomach aches and
some of them definitely had side effects.
It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe after we initially started, then we took a break, and it was maybe like 6 or 8 months later when I was talking to another friend and she mentioned some medication that their kid was taking. And we said, I wonder. And so we talked to his doctor about it, and she's like, well, yeah, we could try that. And so,
because again, we had tried a few medications, we had taken a break, we had tried another one, taken a break. We're kind of at the point again, we're like, he needs something else.
And seeing him struggle and him realize he was struggling was really hard.
Yeah.
He'd be like, I just do this and I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the sweetest kid. So we tried this other meds, and honestly, it made a huge difference right away.
Yeah.
And we're like, geez, this is crazy. I can't believe he's actually, he's responded well to this, and it's made a difference. And then within a couple of weeks, we're really starting to see some improvement. And like within 2 months' time, he went from, I consider him a non-reader to a reader. All of a sudden, the world was making sense in words.
Mm-hmm.
I was like practically crying because I was just like, oh my gosh, he's making such improvements. And he sees that too. We used to joke that with the ADHD that he has, anytime he would be sick, he would slow down enough to be like,
the nicest kid on earth.
Sweetest kid. Like he'd be like, Mommy, can I take care of the dishes for you?
I know you've had a long day, Mommy,
right?
And I just want to help out around the house.
And I'm like, I love you so much, kid. I'm like, can you be mildly sick all the time? Which is awful. I mean, like, this is terrible to say as a parent, but it just made it just slowed him down enough that for him, that was something that was really good. So that was one end of the spectrum for meds. Do you want to tell about the other?
Yeah. And so the other end of the spectrum is we have another child who was on ADHD medication.
When he came into our home.
Yeah.
So
when he joined our home, this child was on ADHD medication. We were told he has ADHD. He really needs his meds, all the stuff. And so we did what every good foster parent does, is we follow the diagnosis and recommendation and medication that he came with. And that's fine. And it worked fine. He was with us for, I don't know, quite a while, honestly. Like this is probably 2 years in before, 2.5 years in maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably around there that we get into our favorite subject of medication and insurance and
pharmacies. Oh my goodness.
And struggling to get stuff filled so bad. Yeah. My least favorite thing ever. And we had an issue where we legitimately could not get his medication. This is after finalization. So this was not he's been adopted at this point. It was not a foster care issue or anything like that. At that point, he's our child.
Right.
And we were unable to get his medication for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Probably in the order of 3 weeks. It was like this, are they going to get it in? They're waiting for it. And then the more I kept digging, the more it's like there's a national shortage and all these pieces. But then we started noticing something in him.
Yeah. And again, paying attention, noticing the details. We started talking. We felt like things have been going a little smoother with him lately. And it was one of these things where like I brought it up to you or you brought it up to me. And we both kind of like, yeah, I know I've noticed that. He seems calmer. Like we haven't had as many issues lately. And eventually we brought it up to him. And I talked it over with him. And he's like, he hadn't even noticed it yet, that he hadn't had his medication. I'm like, buddy, you haven't had your medication in like 3 weeks. He's like, oh, yeah. I'm like, how have you been feeling lately? He's like, my stomach's been feeling way better.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell it was like dawning on him as we talked about it, but he's like, I feel like I don't have a stomach ache all the time like I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel less agitated all the time.
Yeah, and that was, I think, the big one. I mean, obviously his comfort is really important, but he didn't even really say anything about that prior. I think it was just normal for him.
Yeah, he was on the medication long enough that he didn't even notice it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's 3 or 4 weeks into it. I'm like, well, it sounds like they might have the medication. Do you want us to try to get more? Because mom and I are kind of feeling like we want to just let it be for a while.
Keep seeing how it's going.
I feel like things are going better without you on the medication. How do you feel about it? And he's like, yeah, I really agree. Can we do that? We're like, yeah.
Let's do it.
And it's been 9 months now at least.
It's
a while.
It's been a while. And I think he's been doing good with it.
Yeah.
I think in our family, we do a lot of coping mechanisms, as far as, hey, notice you're getting a little agitated. Let's back off. But he knows we listen to him too. So I think that's part of the thing. He's very black and white. And so he likes there to be rules and follow the rules. And when someone breaks the rules, it's not his favorite.
Yep.
Yeah.
So really the foundation there too, though, I'm hearing you say is the connected parenting stuff is important to him.
Mm-hmm.
When he feels safe, when he feels seen and understood and heard out, he's in a better place. And then getting the right medication for each of those boys really made a difference in our home. Like it really helped out, helping with the older one being off his medication and the younger one finally finding the right medication that worked for him and the right dosage. And this doesn't mean that he's going to be on medication forever.
Yeah. No, and that's the other thing I was just about to touch on was that it is just for now.
Yeah.
Right now, we are focused on getting reading skills up to where they need to be. And that's something that will never go away. And we will take it little by little. And I keep telling myself, it just for now doesn't mean forever.
Yeah.
It's what he might need at the certain time. But we know that this works. And so that's been really good.
And again, I think something that a good friend of mine likes to say all the time is you need to be the world's best detective for your kid. And so just because a medication worked for my kid doesn't mean it's going to work for your kid. And just because not being on medication worked better for my kid doesn't mean it's going to work better for another kid. What we try to picture it is as having a parenting toolbox. And when you have your toolbox is most useful when it has as many tools as possible in it.
Absolutely.
As my wife will attest to and say, buy me some more tools.
I like my tools.
So just to be clear, for Valentine's Day, she got tools and I got chocolate and we were both very happy.
It worked. That was a good exchange, I think.
I got my favorite chocolate and you got some brand new tools and we were both very happy.
We were.
It's just amusing because most people would be like, what?
Exactly. And that brings us to our third point is diagnoses are simply a tool.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to say through all of this.
Yep.
It's not a label or limitation. It's a tool. And as a parent, we want to have tools and options and things so that as we understand our children better, as we pay attention, as we look at the details, that we understand our kiddos and their experiences better, then we can help them in the way that meets their needs the best.
Yep.
So let's do a quick run through what the big things to remember are, babe.
Yep. So we want to remember that diagnoses are not just a label, that those can be helpful and those can be insights to your kids that you may not have otherwise. And it does help you know how to best help them. Medication debate to be or not to be, that's up to you as a parent because you're the detective and you need to figure that out. Don't be afraid of them, but don't necessarily just automatically go towards them. You have to know your kid.
Yep.
And then the third thing is that a diagnosis is simply a tool, just something, more information you have about your kid that can be helpful, that can be a way to get to know them better, but also to connect with them better.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you so much again for joining us again on this episode. We are so glad that you're here. And we want to remind you
that you don't have to be a perfect parent,
but that we can all get a little bit better, one connected parenting minute at a time.
Thank you so much for listening to my mom and dad's podcast. It means a lot to me. Make sure to like and subscribe on the way out.
For more parenting tips or to connect with us, check out the Connected Parenting Minute on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can send us an email using connectedparentingminute@gmail.com.